Okay, hi everyone. I think we're now live on YouTube. So welcome to the workshop. My name's Alison Smith. I'm a freelance artist and educator, and I do lots of work with Ilkley Literature Festival, who are hosting this three-part workshop. So for those of you who came and watched the live stream last week, we had a poet and writer from Leeds called Andy Craven Griffiths, who showed us how to write really good poetry. And that's because this whole workshop series is all about making an animated poem. So writing a poem and then creating some visuals to go along with it. And I, as an artist and educator, have been sort of teaching projects and workshops with young people and kids and schools using these techniques for a few years. I call it digital storytelling. So it's the way of combining still images, animation, video, and voice, and things like music and sound as well, to create stories that are digital. So videos that you might put on YouTube. So those of you who were with us last week, you might have written a poem already that you're ready and raring to go and get animating. If you didn't watch last week, don't worry. The video is live on the YouTube channel as well, so you can go and watch it. It's just sort of saved there, so you can watch it anytime. But if you haven't written a poem yet, or you've never written a poem before, don't worry too much. You can go back, watch that video and write your poem. Or you can use somebody else's poem if you really want to. If you're not a writer yourself, then you might want to take a poem that you really like, or even work with a friend. So you might have a friend who's really into writing, you're really into art and kind of animation, and you could team up and do it as a kind of collaboration. Those of you who do have a poem ready from last week, what I would say today is you're not going to work along with me. So last week, Andy left some gaps for you to do your writing. I'm not going to do that because we've got quite a lot to get through. But what I would say is have a pen and paper to hand, because you might want to start making some notes, jotting down some ideas, and start your storyboard today whilst I run through this session. So the whole process, just to sort of give you the overview, is you write a poem, you then storyboard, so you plan, and we're going to do that today. You plan what your video is going to look like to go alongside your poem. You then make your visuals, so they might be still images or animations. Then you record your voiceover. So next week, we're going to look at recording your voiceover, and then you edit it all together. So you take the voiceover and the images and you use some video editing software to put it all together. So we're going to do that stuff next week. This week is about learning how to storyboard. So how to break your poem down into chunks, into kind of scenes, and then how to plan what's going to happen. And also about creating those animations. So thinking, you basically using stop motion animation techniques to create some different visuals. You can do loads of different things with stop motion. So if you've never done stop motion before, it's a really simple way of animating. It's been used for decades, and at least 100 years people have been making these kind of animations, and it's really simple. You create an image, you change something or move something, you take another picture, you change something, you take another picture, and so on. And as you move the characters or the props within the animation, it then goes together and looks like it's moving. So most of you will probably have done this before. If not, have a go, because it's really good fun. You can do it with loads of different things. So you can use like objects, toys. Loads of people do it with Lego or plasticine. If you watch any of the like Aardman films, they're all done with little plasticine models. So you can use loads of different sort of media in your animations. But today I'm going to show you some techniques that I quite like using for this kind of work, which is using 2D, so drawings or collages, and using different techniques to make them look like they're moving. So that is what stop motion animation is. Now we're going to talk about what you're going to need to actually do the session. So as I said, you don't need this right now. Don't worry about, going and scrabbling around your house trying to find everything now. This is just for afterwards when you're kind of getting set up ready to animate. This is what you're going to need to have. I'm just going to share my screen, find the right document. Okay. So what you're going to need to do your animation, you're going to need a camera of some kind. I'm not going to talk too much about the technical side of using different apps and software, because I'm aware that everybody's going to have a different setup. It depends what you've got at home as to what kind of software or app you're going to use. Most of the animation apps that are out there do exactly the same thing. They're all pretty much the same. So don't worry, you know, whether you're using Apple or Android. So when I say camera on this list, it says it just there. You can either use a smartphone, so an iPod, an iPod, that's really old, an iPhone or an Android phone. You can use a tablet, so an iPad or any other type of tablet. So long as it's got a camera, you should be able to use it. Or if you don't have a tablet or a smartphone, you can use a laptop or like a PC, and you'll just need to connect it to a webcam, or you'll need a digital camera that you can take your still images on, and then you can import them to your laptop or your computer. So some kind of camera. You'll also need a tripod or a stand to hold your camera on. And the reason why you need to do this is because we're going to be working on our desk. So if you picture, can't really see, but if this is my piece of paper that I'm going to be animating on, and I'm going to have lots of bits, little bits of paper or drawings that are going to kind of be moving around on here, and then I'm going to get my phone, which is what I'm going to use today. I need my phone to be suspended up above my sheet of paper. So if I scroll down on this document, you can see lots of examples. So these are, you'll see my setup shortly at the end of this, towards the end of the workshop. I'm going to do a demo and show you how I've made the animations that I'm going to show. But these are just some images from a website, which we're going to share actually in an article on the Ukulele Lit Fest website. So you'll be able to find that link afterwards. But these are some of the ways that other people do this. I've got a stand that I've used before on projects, and you can see on the screen on the top right, that's the kind, a little bit similar to the stand I'm using. Basically, any kind of tripod that will hold your phone or your tablet flat. But you can see there's loads of the things that people have like improvised. So you can buy something, or you might have your parents or your siblings or someone in your family might have something lying around at home, like a little thing that holds their phone in their car or something like that, that you can kind of adapt and maybe get some gaffer tape going on. But also you can see on this PDF here that there's loads of different ways you can do it. So this one on the top left, they've got their tablet kind of stuck to the edge of their table. So you can see they've got their kind of working area down here on the floor, and then they've just gaffered their iPad to the table so that the camera is sort of poking over the edge and looking down. And then they're working down here and taking their pictures on their iPad. This one is the kind of something you can buy off the internet for like a tenner, which just holds your phone up above your table. This one here is quite cool. It's like a cardboard box setup. So you basically get quite a sturdy cardboard box, cut a hole in the top and cut some holes in the sides. And then you put your piece of paper that you're going to work on inside the box. And then you're going to have your phone looking down at it. If you're going to do something like that, you might need to have a lamp. So you can see that they've got a lamp in that shot. And then there's a couple of others here, and this sort of crazy one that someone's crafted out of cardboard. So there's loads and loads of different ways you can do that. I'm not going to go into loads of detail on making those, but we'll share those links. So if you need to craft yourself a tripod, there'll be links to show you how to do that. So you need your tripod, you need some plain paper. A4 is fine, A3 is better. I've only got A4 today, but if you've got A3, it just means you've got a bigger area to work with. You'll also need some drawing materials. So you'll need things like pens, felt pens, kind of markers. Things that are quite bright and bold work well for animation. If you're using kind of quite pastel-y colours or like faint pencil crayons, they're not going to show up on the screen as well. So something quite bright and bold is good, like felt tips are great, or Sharpies. You're going to need some tape, just like standard masking tape or sellotape. And then for the collage technique that I'm going to show you, the third technique I'm going to show you today, you'll need things like colour paper and card, scissors and blue tack. So that's where you're going to kind of create a bit of a collage scene and then move that around and animate it. Okay, let's get rid of that and we'll just get to the next bit. So the first thing we're going to do is think about how we storyboard. So a storyboard, you might have done this in English before if you're doing kind of, if you're like writing a story or you're thinking about film, if you're working on a play, then storyboards are something that come up quite a lot. And I mean, what we're going to do, I've got a document here. So this is the table. This is a storyboard I'll show you a bit later on that I started for the example. But basically all a storyboard is a grid that you're then going to draw out your different scenes in. So this document is going to be available to download off the Ilkley Lit Fest website after this. So if you want to download it and print it off, you can. But actually, you can also just do this. So I did this before. You can just get a piece of plain paper, and you might, if you've got a poem ready to go, you might want to do this now. Get your plain paper and just draw a big screen, a big sort of grid of 9 squares. I've done 9 here. You could do 6 if you've got a shorter poem, but 9 is good because it gives you kind of a bit more to work with. And what you need to do is start thinking about what the lines in your poem are and how you're going to break those down into scenes. So I'm now just going to switch my camera so that you can see my workspace. Here we go, lots of paper and lots of cables. And if the cables are in shot, I'll try and move them. So those of you who were with us last week will remember that Andy shared some poetry with us as his examples for the techniques that he was showing you. And this was one of them. It's an extract, it's not actually a poem, it's an extract from a play by Duncan Macmillan called Every Brilliant Thing. And it's a list poem. So you might have done this last week where, and Andy kind of tasked you to write a list poem where you've thought about all the different things that you love, things that you think are brilliant in life, and then add more detail and add kind of the senses so that you're kind of really helping your reader or your listener to picture these things that you find are important in your life. So list poems are really good to animate because it's lots and lots of kind of images. You're giving your viewer or your reader lots of images in their head. So there's lots of stuff you can do with it. For this example, I decided I'm not going to try to do the whole thing because otherwise I'd spend a whole day on it. I've just done the top 5 in this list. But that's an important thing to think about when you're animating a poem, is if you've got 23 items on your list, sorry, that's a siren in the background. So this one has 23 items on this list, which would mean I'd need 23 different scenes. So the technique that I'm going to show you that I've used to animate this section of this poem is called what I call moving stills. So it's really basic kind of technique for creating essentially a still image, and then you're just going to move a tiny little bit of it. So you could have some of the items on the list just be a still. So if you were going to do that, you would literally just take all the items on your list. So this one starts ice cream, water fights, staying up past your bedtime and being allowed to watch TV. You could just draw a picture for each of those. And it could be as simple or as complicated as you like. You could draw your picture, take a photo of it on your phone or your tablet or your digital camera, and then you don't even need to bother animating. So if you're struggling with things like the tripod and the kind of setup, getting it all set up so you can animate, that might be a good option for you, just using stills to create visuals. And if you were to do that, then next week when I show you how to edit, you just need to bring all those stills into the editing software and then add your voiceover over the top. But today, I'm going to show you how to actually animate them. So to begin with, we're going to look at the storyboard. So this top 5, ice cream, water fights, staying up past your bedtime and being allowed to watch TV, the colour yellow and wearing a cape. So the first thing that I do with a storyboard is Write down the lines of your poem. So in each square, this is going to be each scene, I'm going to write the line of the poem at the bottom. So here I've written ice cream, water fights, staying up past your bedtime, etc. That means that you know what it is that you're trying to visualize in this scene. Then think about, how am I going to visualize this? How am I going to create a little sequence of animation or a still image that kind of visualizes what I'm saying in this poem? I would keep these fairly simple. So for my ice cream one, I thought I'm just going to have a picture of an ice cream. I also debated, like, would I have the hand there? Is there a hand holding the ice cream, or is it just an ice cream floating in space? What I wouldn't do for something like this is create a really elaborate scene with, you know, at the beach with your friends and your dog and you're getting an ice cream and you're eating it, because it might take you half an hour to draw that. If you're going to do 23 items, that's going to be, you know, a long stint of animating. So I would keep these pretty simple. I've also used my storyboard just to think about the kind of, just to like note things down. So like, what colour is my ice cream going to be? I want it to stand out. I don't want it to be the same colour as the ice cream cone. So I've thought maybe pink or maybe mint chocolate chip. It could be green. And then the motion is what you really want to try and think about when you're storyboarding. So the still image is an image of an ice cream. And what you can do with this technique is add things to that picture a little bit at a time to make it look like it's moving. And you'll see what I mean in a sec when I show you the example. You can't take anything away. Once you've got that base image, once you've drawn your ice cream, you can't then move that ice cream around, and you can't take anything away from that image. All you can do is add things to that image. So all of these different examples I'll run through show you ways that you could do that. So that's ice cream, really simple. Water fights, I thought, right, I might have a character with a bucket. He's kind of mid-action shot, kind of about to throw the water, and the water then appears out of the bucket. So it starts off quite small, and then it kind of comes further and further out. And with the storyboard, as you can see, I've not done very neat drawings. It's kind of scribbled and scrawled and notes all over it, because this is a kind of a working document. You can come back to this, you can change it, you can scrap things entirely. One thing I do quite often when I run workshops is, for example, with your poem, I would say, look at the poem and think of the ones that you can think of an idea for straight away, something that's really simple, and plan those first, because you don't have to animate in order. You don't even have to storyboard in order. You could leave these ones, empty for now. So if there's one that you think, oh, I don't know how I'm going to do that, I would leave it empty, go to the ones that are easy to begin with, and then go and animate them, and then come back to your storyboard. Because if you're quite new to animation, once you've done a scene and you've figured out what's possible and how it works, and maybe things that aren't that realistic because they're going to take forever, then you can come back and think, oh, well, I know what I could do now. I've got to grips with it. I can figure this out better this time round. So don't be worried to come back and change things later. So yeah, my water fights is going to be water splashing out. My TV, staying up past your bedtime, I just thought, I'm just going to draw a scene with someone sat in front of a TV. And then I thought, for the motion, maybe I'll just have a cup with some little lines of steam, like there's a cup of hot chocolate on the side because you're staying up past your bedtime. So think about the image that you're creating in your poem. Think about what little kind of visual symbols or keys can we give that viewer to show that it's past your bedtime, or to show that you're having a water fight. If they weren't hearing that voiceover, could they still figure out what was actually happening in this scene? The colour yellow was the next one on this. So I thought, oh, I'm just going to scribble. I'm just going to fill the page with yellow, and just a big scribble. And then I actually thought about a transition. So in a list poem, you've got lots and lots of items in a row that are going to go from one to the other. So you're going to have a picture of some ice cream that's going to cut to a picture of a water fight. You can do creative things with your transition. So here I thought there was potential for that. So I thought I'm going to do the colour yellow, a big yellow scribble, and then I'm going to actually zoom out from the cape. And so the yellow thing becomes the cape. So as you zoom out, it reveals this person wearing a yellow cape. So that's how I storyboarded that. And I'm just going to make sure I haven't missed any tips out. Now what I'm going to do is show you the video. So I'm going to show you the first bit of animation that I did for these scenes yesterday. And then we're going to move on to the next one. I'm going to do that with all three techniques. So I'm going to show you my storyboard and talk through my planning, then show you what I made. And then at the end of the workshop, the last 20 minutes of the workshop, then I'll do the demo where I show you how I actually do it on my iPhone with the setup. So let's share the screen. Here we go. And actually, to make it a little more interactive and to give you an idea of what it will be like when I've edited this all together and it's all finished, I'm going to try to read the poem out to match. But if I'm a bit slow, I apologize. Okay. Ice cream. Water fights. Staying up past your bedtime and watching TV. The colour yellow. Wearing a cape. Okay, so I'm going to go back through that. It's pretty fast, as you can see, and that's the thing with a list poem. Your different stills, they don't need to be very long. So you don't need to create lots of elaborate animation, because if you did, then it would be too long and your voiceover is going to kind of end up getting out of sync. So you just want quite quick, simple images and lots of them. And because you've got lots, so if you were animating this poem that's 23 items long, you would need to do them fairly quickly. So you don't want to have to spend too much time on each one. So the ice cream, you can see there, I've just got the drips coming down. Then the water fight, we start off with, this is the base image that I used. So I drew this. I actually changed it from my storyboard. So if you see my storyboard there, I had like a little guy with a bucket. In the end, what happened was, as I was trying to do the drawing, I realized that I couldn't get his face right. Found drawing faces quite hard. I know lots of people do that. And I decided to change it. And I actually decided that the bucket, the way the water was coming out the bucket didn't look right when I tried to animate. So I changed it around and I switched to a hose because I felt that it was actually easier to get the water to look more natural coming out of the hose. So that was a few, I mean, let's see, I don't know how many frames that was. It's probably about 5 or 6. And then this one, it's quite nice and still. There's not, you'd hardly even notice anything happening, but there's little steam lines just appear. Then it fills with yellow and then it zooms out onto the girl in the cape. So some really, really simple little moving stills. So you start with the base image, you can kind of do that in your own time. And then when you come to the animation, you're just doing some tiny little additions to that drawing to make it a little bit more interesting. Okay, so the next one that I worked on yesterday was the Kate Clanchy poem, which was really nice, which was the third one that Andy did. And it's called Stance. Now for this, I was thinking of a technique that I've used before called time-lapse drawing. You might have done this before. You might have seen this done on YouTube. It's basically where you do a drawing and you take lots and lots of pictures of it one at a time. So you make a little kind of mark, you take a photo, then another mark, you take a photo. You can do it with your hand in. So if you were to do proper time lapse, that means that you set the camera to take a picture every couple of seconds. But with this technique, it's a little bit different because you're making the mark on the paper. So you kind of make your mark and then you press the button on your phone or your tablet to take the photo with your hand out of the shot. So it looks like it's magically appearing on the page. This kind of technique works quite well for a poem like this one, which is Stamps by Kate Clancy, because it's quite short. It's a short poem, but also it's got one kind of key image to it. So there's not lots and lots of different images or different kind of metaphors that she's using. It's kind of one main image that this poem paints. So just to remind you, I'll just read it really quickly. For those of you who didn't hear it last week or need reminding, it goes like this. Now I sit, my child, on the jut of my hip and take his weight with the curve of my waist, like a tree split at the fork, like lovers leaning out of a waltz. Nothing is lost. I was never one of those girls stood slim as a sapling. I was often alone at the dance. So I felt like there was this nice image that Andy touched upon last week around this idea of being like a tree, being split at the fork. And that idea, I think, as well, in the metaphor in the poem, being about growth and about this woman, she's growing kind of alone. And then when she splits at the fork and a new branch emerges, it's when she has a child. So it's about her growing into being a mother. So I wanted to do something that was quite simple and quite sort of taking that metaphor of growing or being a tree. So I'm going to show you the video first because I haven't got a storyboard for this, because actually with these kind of time-lapse drawings, you don't really always need a storyboard. You just need to plan a lot more and practice your drawing a lot more beforehand. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to go back to our video. Computer is taking its time. Come on. And again, I will try to perform the poem for you as you watch my animation. I tried to make it long enough so that we can fit. Okay. So we'll go past our first one. Okay, so Kate Clancy, Stamps. Now I sit, my child, on the jut of my hip and take his weight with the curve of my waist, like a tree split at the fork, like lovers leaning out of a waltz. Nothing is lost. I was never one of those girls stood slim as a sapling. I was often alone at the dance. So you can see what I did there was I drew a really simple picture, a kind of silhouette of a mother and a child. The child sat on the jut of her hip, resting on her waist, as she describes in the poem. But I did it a little bit at a time and started from the bottom. I actually did this a couple of times over. So I decided on the image that I was going to create. I decided what the kind of final image was going to be. And then I tried 2 different ways to animate it. The first time I did a bit longer strokes, so that the stroke of my pen was a bit longer. So it wasn't quite as slow, the animation. It was a little bit more kind of jerky. But also where I did my strokes was slightly different. What I did the second time round, which you can see here if I just zoom back, is I started at the bottom because I wanted to go with this idea of it being like a tree. So these first 3 lines that you can see kind of look like they could be grass. So I like that idea that at the beginning, and this is what you can do with this technique, is at the beginning, you don't necessarily want your viewer to know what it is they're looking at. This image is going to appear slowly as they're watching your video, and you kind of want there to be a little bit of mystery to begin with. So a little bit of kind of them trying to figure out what is this thing that is appearing on the screen. So you can start out like that, and there's loads of other stuff I could have done here. I wanted to emphasize the fork. So there you can see there where I've kind of created this fork shape between her and his shoulder, the child and the mother, because I wanted to emphasize that with that line in the poem where she talks about the fork. Now, I'm just going to take 1 second to shut my conservatory because it's raining quite hard and it might be a bit noisy. The joys of being live on YouTube when you're at home. I'm sure everyone's having the same thing. So yeah, with the kind of way I did this drawing, I wanted to emphasize that. And I also wanted to just keep it really simple. I didn't want to have loads of detail in this. And I think it works quite well for that kind of drawing. You might want to do something way more complicated. And for this poem, if you decided that maybe you wanted to have a go at animating this poem yourself, there's loads of other things you could do with this. You could really emphasize the idea of it being a tree, or even take that idea of them being like lovers leaning out of a waltz. There's sort of references to dance as well. So you could try to sort of incorporate those themes into your drawing as well. So it gives you lots and lots of potential for, if you're into drawing and you're into illustration, for doing something really beautiful and quite elaborate that kind of appears over time with your voiceover over the top. So as I said, you don't necessarily, I didn't actually do a storyboard for that one, but the tips that I would share with you for the time-lapse drawing are, think about how that image is going to appear. So maybe practice it a few times over. Think about the style of the drawing. It doesn't need to be realistic. It can be quite abstract. It doesn't need to be of anything real. You know, when you're creating artwork and you're kind of visualizing a sort of an emotion or a feeling that you might have in your poem, it doesn't need to look like anything real. It can be an abstract drawing as well. And yeah, just try out loads of ideas. So I did several different versions of that drawing before I did the final animation, and I did a couple of versions of the animation as well. And I'll show you, I probably won't have time to show you exactly how I did that, but it's quite simple to do. And essentially all I would say is make yourself an outline. So I'll show you here. So this is my drawing here. This is the finished drawing that I did. And if I was going to do this animation again, what I would probably do is put this underneath another sheet of paper. And this is what I did yesterday, actually. So you could draw out your picture as a faint pencil line. And then when you come to, you have your phone ready, your kind of phone up above it, you're then just tracing. So you know where you're going to draw before you start, because you've got that faint line. Or you could do this. Which you might, yeah, you can probably just see on that screen there. If you've got it layered over, because it's quite nice a dark black line, you can then just trace over the top. Because at the beginning of the video, it's not necessarily going to show up. You can see it, but the viewer probably can't make it out. So you can use that as a guide. So I'll do a little demo of some of them at the end. If I have time, I'll demo that one as well. So you can see how I do it with my screen and my phone. But for now, I'm going to move on to the next one. So the next technique that I'm going to show you is called collage animation. And with collage, this is a technique that I've used loads over the years. And for this one, I was using a poem that Andy shared last week, which was by a man called Tony Hoagland. And this was the one that you might remember if you were with us last week, called Trying to Keep You Happy. And it's all about a man sort of suggesting all the things that he would do to keep his partner happy. And Andy gave you a task to think about, you know, if you were going to keep somebody happy. His example was his cat. Like, what would his cat want the most, or what does his cat want more of or less of? So Tony Hoagland's poem, I just decided for this example to take the first two scenes. So what I would do if I was animating this poem is I would read through the whole poem, and I would start to think about the kind of the metaphors, the themes, some of the images, the things that are easy to animate, some of the things that might be a little bit harder. But I would think about the scenes. So to start with, it says, I'm going to nail a sheet of tin upon the bedroom roof so that on August nights the extravagance of rain will wake you up, then put you back to sleep again. So in my animation, I can picture that, all of those lines there. So that's the first 4 lines. That's going to be one scene. So that's scene 1. Then it goes on. I will paint the front room yellow and the back room blue so you can change your mood by relocation. So then I think that isn't the second scene, so that's scene 2. The third, I'm not going to go any further with my animation, but I'll continue to read it out. There will be no newspapers allowed indoors with their tales of human ugliness, and no clocks upon the wall. But in the centre of the house, we will install a fountain, so the sound of running water can remind us what time really is. So this is kind of one sort of scene, I guess, within the poem, but I actually think you could break it into 2. So I think as an animation, you might think, well, to begin with, there's going to be no newspapers allowed, no clocks. So I might take that as one scene. That would be scene 3. You could think about how you could kind of show that the newspapers are banned and the clocks are banned. It could be taking a clock off the wall. And then in the centre of the house, we'll install a fountain, so the sound of running water can remind us what time really is. That would be 4 for me. So then you could do a really lovely animation of a fountain in the middle of a room. So the technique I'm going to show you for this one is one that's really versatile, and it's basically using cut out props. So for the painting one, which you'll see in a second, these were the props that I made. This is my paintbrush. And these are my kind of strips of paint that you'll see in a second what I did with them to create this little sequence. But you can also cut out characters, you can cut out different shapes. You'll see the first one I did about the tin on the bedroom roof is a roof with some rain. So this is the storyboard that I did. So I didn't write the whole line, I wrote the start of the line on my storyboard first. And then I thought, what's going to happen in this? Now, this technique gives you a little bit more flexibility than the first one, than the moving stills, because rather than drawing a picture and then that picture cannot change, with a collage, everything can move around. So I could cut out the shape of a house out of some paper, and then I could move that house out of the way. So nothing is stuck down, everything can move around, which in animation is really useful. So I decided that I would create this house, so the end of a house, and this piece of tin would kind of appear on the roof. Now I thought, oh, well, do I need to have the little character? Do I need to have a little man climbing up on the roof and putting the tin there? And I could have done that, but I know that that's actually going to be quite difficult to get it looking really good. So I actually thought, well, I'm going to take some artistic license here. I'm just going to have the tin appearing, so it just sort of slides up on the roof. Because, it doesn't need to look realistic. You can stylize this however you like. Then I'm going to have some rain falling. And I'll talk to you a little bit about what I did with the rain when I've shown the example. Then for the second one, the painting the front room yellow and the back room blue, I thought, right, well, that's quite easy. I'm just going to get a paintbrush. But rather than actually using paint in my animation to sort of colour in the front area and the back area, I'm going to use strips of paper. So I thought I'm going to fill the page with these strips of paper to make the front section of the screen yellow and the back section of the screen blue. So that's how I kind of planned it out. There's loads of different things you can do with this technique. Like I said, it's really flexible. And you can start off quite simple, and then you can get more and more elaborate as you get more confident with it. But I'm now going to show you my last little example, and then we'll go on to the demo for the last sort of 20 minutes. So here we go, share screen. So again, I will read the poem out over the top. So we've got our first 2. Here we go, collage. Right, Trying to Keep You Happy by Tony Hoagland. I'm going to nail a sheet of tin upon the bedroom roof so that on August nights the extravagance of rain will wake you up, then put you back to sleep again. I will paint the front room yellow and the back room blue so you can change your mood by relocation. So you can see there, I created these 2 scenes using cardboard, so coloured cards. So I would recommend, if you're going to do some collaging, to get some nice card. Like this, I've got a big collection now because I've been doing this for years and years. But this nice brown that's kind of like a craft paper that's got quite a nice texture to it, and this lovely blue that I found for the sky. Having really nice colours, like lots of different colours, and things that are not just primary coloured as well, I think works really well. I think if you can kind of choose quite nice subtle colours, rather than, like, if you imagine if this was like a bright royal blue sky and like a bright red house, it would look a lot more childlike. Whereas these colours are a bit more kind of tonal, and they're a little bit, you know, it's got a little bit more of a different feel to it. I kept it really simple, as you can see. I haven't started drawing roof tiles or chimney pots or anything. I just thought with this kind of animation, keeping it simple works really well. So just a really simple triangle for the roof. And then I've just added a couple of details. So I just added the little aerial here. So I decided, you know, a little kind of old school TV aerial that's probably not worked for years, and then a satellite dish that probably hasn't worked for years either. And, you know, that's the kind of thing that shows the viewer that this is a roof. It's not just a brown triangle. It kind of gives you that those little visual kind of aids, I guess, to sort of show you what it is that you're looking at. And then my tin appears. So the tin, as you can see, just kind of magically gets pushed up on the roof. So I decided not to put that character in there. And to show that it's a piece of tin, I mean, I thought of like corrugated tin, which you probably, unless you live in the countryside, you might have never seen corrugated tin, but it was a building material used a lot back in the kind of, you know, in your parents' and my generation's childhood. So it's a kind of sort of rusty bit of metal that's sort of wiggly. And so I thought I'll just make this a bit wiggly so that it shows you what it is. Then I was thinking about the rain. Now, animating rain can be really hard because you've got loads and loads of tiny little things to move around. So I decided to do something a little bit different, a little bit more stylized than just having the rain come down. So I started with the rain appearing, and it all comes down. But rather than kind of dripping off and more rain coming and it coming kind of constantly, I actually decided to do it in this way where the rain was these quite solid kind of little shapes, these little blocks, and then they rebound off the roof. And the reason for that was I was thinking about, you know, the line in the poem, picturing what that would be like if you were laid in bed on an August night like we are now, with lots of rain in August. And if this idea of the extravagance of rain waking you up, it would almost sound like kind of nails or some kind of hard metal hitting the roof and rebounding off again and again. So rather than just having the rain look quite realistic in the way that it comes down and hits the roof, I went for this slightly more stylized motion instead. And then with the front room and the back room, you can see here, just using these strips of yellow paper and blue paper works really well. It's quite effective, I think, to show that you're painting. You can tell that, you know, it's not actually paint, but it still gives you that idea, that kind of visual clue that that's what's happening. This paintbrush is creating these lines of colour. What I actually did with this one is I did it in reverse, and this is a good trick, which when I've shown you the demo in a second, I'll show you actually how I did it and reverse it. Most of the stop motion apps have a reverse function, so you can record something the opposite way around. So sometimes it's easier to do it like that, and then you flip it round afterwards. So what I actually did was I started with the end point, so I started here with all of them, so then I knew that they were all in exactly the right place. They were all laid out in the position that I wanted them to be. Then I brought my paintbrush in. So if I zoom backwards now, you'll see the way that I did it. So then I just, every frame, I pushed the paintbrush up a little bit, and then I spun it around and did the same again, and then again and again. So that is how it looked initially. And then I obviously made it go in reverse, so it looks like that paint is being dragged rather than pushed. So we'll now go to, this is the bit where technical issues may occur. So I'm now going to try to demonstrate how I've done all of these animations. So I'm going to move all of the storyboards out of the way. But as I said, when you're doing this, you don't have to do your storyboard completely and then do your animation. I would kind of go back and forth between the two, because actually you'll learn stuff as you do things, and then you can apply that learning to your next scene. So I've got this big stand here, which you're not going to be able to see under this webcam because it's quite low down. I'm just going to raise this up. Try not to fill the screen with cables. So this little tripod thing is actually something that I think they use for, like, if you're in bed and you want to watch your iPad. But we used these quite a lot in a project that I ran with Ilkley last year. So you can see here, this is the kind of rough setup I've got. I've got a piece of paper, and I've sellotaped this to my table, which is where your tape comes in. Just move it slightly across. So with animation, whatever it is that you're animating or animating on your kind of base, you want that to be stuck down. You don't want this to be moving around, because then it will mess up your animation. You also want to make sure that your camera, which in my case is my phone, which I'm going to put on in a second, you want to make sure that that is still as well. You don't want your camera to move around. So if you do end up making a DIY tripod, you need to make sure it's as robust as possible, and it's not going to move around, because you're going to be hitting your phone, well, not hitting the phone, you're going to be pressing the button on your phone. And if every time you press your phone it moves, then you're going to have an issue. I'm just going to zoom out slightly. Now, I will apologise, because I've had loads of issues this afternoon with webcams focusing, so it might be a little blurry, but hopefully you can get the idea. I'm going to take my phone away for a sec. So first of all, I'm going to show you how I did the moving image one, so you can just see the picture for now. So what I would do if I was creating this from scratch is I would get my piece of paper and I would get everything set up first. So get your tripod, your phone, your paper on your table, get it so that in the app it's all kind of there so you can see. If I just go into this app here, just quickly show you. This is Stop Motion Studio, which is a really good iPhone app. So if I go to, that's the wrong way around. There we go. So you can see there that I've got it on my screen. So what's important about this is doing this before you start drawing, is that now I know how big my drawing needs to be. If I'd done this drawing like full size, like filled an A4 sheet, then it would be too big and I wouldn't be able to fit it all on my screen. Or if I'd done it tiny, I'd end up having to like zoom in really far, and then the quality wouldn't be great. So think about, just sort of get an idea of how big your drawing needs to be before you start. Then I would do the drawing, get it so you're happy with it, but obviously make sure that you don't add the thing, the sort of motion. So in this case, I knew that I needed to draw a picture of a girl with her bucket and her hose pipe. I've not filled in the bottom, so I'm going to crop this later probably, or just have her kind of floating. I don't need to do all of her feet and everything else. So I knew I needed the girl and her hose pipe, but I don't want to do the water yet. I'm going to save the water for when I start animating. So let's get this set up. So this app, as I said, all the stop motion apps basically do the same thing. You should be able to go into the app and start a project. And I would start a new project for every scene that you're going to do, just because when you come to editing, it's a little bit easier. If they're all in one sort of video, then it gets a bit complicated trying to chop them up and put them in the right order, or move them around. So if you do them all as separate scenes, then it's a bit easier. So I've started a new project. It's brought me to this screen here, and I've got a big button you can see on the right to take my pictures, just like on a camera. And then I've got this little toggle thing over here, which is what in animation is called onion skin. Now, for this kind of animation, you don't need to use onion skin too much, but it will become really important later for the collage. So I'll show you it later. So to begin with, as you can see here, if I do that with my hand, you can see the shadow of my hand. Now, that's a really crucial thing with any animation, is getting good lighting. Now, what I've done is just positioned myself tactically in the room. So I've made sure that I've got a nice bright light in the middle of my room. I actually put a brighter light bulb in it this morning. And I've made sure that where I've positioned my tripod and my paper is kind of in a good shot with the light. So the light is landing on my paper. There aren't any things blocking it. But if I had something here, over here, you know, like a bit of tripod, then you'd be able to see this huge shadow across my animation. You can use things like a desk lamp or a bedside lamp. If you're using a cardboard box, you might need that, especially to make sure that it's well lit. So I'm going to get started. So to begin with, I've got my picture drawn. I'm going to start by just taking a picture of that. And then I'm going to start adding my water. So if you can see now, actually, if I toggle that off, there you go. So you can now see my hand on camera. I'm going to start by drawing a tiny, tiny bit of water just starting to appear out of that hose pipe. Now, you might not be able to see it very clearly on there because of this camera, but hopefully, eventually you will. So I've then taken a picture. I'm going to go back. I'm going to add my next little bit of water and take another picture. I'm going to see if I can get it to focus a bit better. No. So all I'm doing is adding a little bit more each time. So you should be able to start seeing it now on the screen. And when you're doing animation like this, you've got to think about what motion am I trying to represent here? Like, what does water look like when it comes out of a hose? So here I might start to add some little drips as well, because as well as the main kind of stream of water, you would also get some little drips spraying off the sides. So with any kind of animation like this, I would say try not to do too much at once. Don't do like the whole thing or half of this stream of water all at the same time. With animation, the smaller the movement or the smaller the change, the smoother the final thing will be. So I'm going to do one more and add a couple more drips. And I'm using these nice watercolor pens, which I would definitely recommend if you're into art and illustration, because they're kind of like felt pens, but they're a lot nicer to work with. So there we go. I think that little scene is now done. So I can press the play button on here, and you can see it's just adding them, stitching them all together and showing you the full sequence. In these apps as well, you'll have an option if you go back to the project. So now you can see that's my screen, and then down here, all of the different slides. What happens sometimes, especially if you're working with other people, if you've got someone helping you out, which is really good, you might have a shot where your hand is in the shot, which happens all the time with animation, because once you get into a flow, you're kind of doing things quickly and you're taking pictures and something might go wrong. If it goes wrong, just take your hand or whatever it is in shot that shouldn't be, take it away and take the picture again. Then when you go back to this view here on your app, you can then delete that frame. So you can tap on the frame and it brings up all of these different options, and delete is just there. So there's loads of other ones as well. You can insert things. But as I said before, I'm not going to go into loads and loads of detail when it comes to the apps, because YouTube is full of amazing tutorials for these apps. So if you're going to use Stop Motion Studio on an iPhone or an iPad, I would say just go and watch their tutorial if you're having trouble. But they're really, really good apps, and they're really easy to do. So you probably can just get on with it and give it a try without needing any kind of tutorial. So I'll really quickly, we've got 8 minutes to go, but we might run over very slightly, but probably not too much. I'm going to really quickly show you how I did my time-lapse drawing. So you'll notice here that on this screen on my phone, I've got bits of table on either side. That doesn't matter very much, because actually what's going to happen is at the end, when we edit next week, I can crop those images. So don't worry if it's not perfect on the thing. Now, yeah, you can just see that. I'm just wondering if you're going to be able to see with my slightly rubbish webcam. But that's the image that I drew yesterday of the, you can see here, of the lady with the child on her hip. And as I said before, what I would do if I was doing this again now is I would actually just trace it. So I would put that one down, the one that I'd sort of practiced or done before, and I would put a new piece of paper over the top. And then I would need my masking tape. So I've got some masking tape here. And I would need to stick this down because otherwise it's going to start moving around and we don't want that to ruin our animation. So make sure it's in the right position. Get it, check on your screen that it's in the right place. Just give it a couple of little bits of sellotape to make sure that it's not going to move. And then you won't be able to see it at the moment, but I can very faintly see that line underneath. So I would start off by just taking a picture of the blank screen, and then we'll crop this down later. You can see there's various things layered on top. But then I would just start by doing a line and taking a photo. And it's up to you how long your sort of strokes are each time. The smaller the stroke, then the more you'll end up taking. So I think yesterday I ended up taking like 70 frames in that animation. It depends how long your poem is, really. The more strokes you do, the sort of smoother it will be, and then the longer you can make it. And the beauty with the editing apps is that at the end, if you need to make it shorter or longer, you can slow it down or speed it up to match your voiceover. So once you've got your voiceover in your editing app, you know how much time you need to fill. So I'm not going to do the whole thing, but you can see there, if I do a couple more bits, this is just the bottoms of her legs that kind of look a bit like grass. If I then press play, you can see those three appearing little bit by bit. So that's the basics of the time-lapse drawing. You could spend hours and hours doing a really beautiful thing. I had a guy in a session I did a while back who did a really beautiful, like a big picture of a moth. And he spent hours and hours animating this moth with all these tiny little details. It was really amazing. Right, I'm now going to just turn this over. So the last one I'm going to show you now is the collage. So again, I'm just gonna, this has got stuff on the back of it, but it doesn't matter. Stick these down. And I'm gonna get my, ooh, gone out of focus, have we? Come on, webcam. There we go. Let's come back eventually. Okay, let's get back on the little phone. So what I would do beforehand, before I put my phone in the way so you can't see, is I would just make sure that I've got all of my props ready. So obviously you need to think about what you need to cut out, what you need to draw. You know, this is my little paintbrush, which I just cut out of grey card, and then I added on the handle there. With these, I wanted to make sure they were all the same size. So I kind of chopped one out first and then used that as a template for the others. So you need to kind of think about your props before you begin. And as I said, I did this backwards. So what I did was arrange these, because if I did it forwards, it would be a bit harder to make it all look really neat. Whereas when you do it backwards, you're starting with the end image, which then means you've got a little bit more control over it. Now, I think maybe I was, that one's that way around, get it exactly how you want it. So arrange it how you like on the paper. And if you're doing something like a word, so if you had a word on your animation, you might cut out the letters. And that's sometimes good to do backwards as well, because like just as it is here, you can start with all those props in the right place, and then you can slowly kind of move them and take them away. Then when you reverse it, it kind of looks like they're all kind of coming in and landing in these perfect places. So that's how I began yesterday, with my paint bars arranged and then my paintbrush on there as well. Get my phone in position. I'm going to start a new project. So rather than adding to that last one, I'm going to go back and go to new movie here. And so you can see, get to the camera. So there we go, that's my screen. I've got it all set up. It's all like in shot, it's in the right position. I'm going to take a picture. And then all I did was just push that paintbrush up a little bit, take another picture, push it up again. So this works well because it's quite a simple movement. You don't have to sort of, if you ever try and animate somebody walking, which is a good challenge, if you're getting in stop motion animation and you're sort of trying things out and trying to learn these techniques, trying to cut out a little man and then get him to look, I'm just going to focus. Try and get him to look like he's walking across the screen with his arms and legs moving in the right kind of natural way. It's really difficult, and you see why these Aardman animations take so long. Now, what I'm going to show you here is this little feature called onion skin, and this will probably be on all of the animation apps that you can find, whatever you're using, and it's a way of basically showing what your last slide was. So if there you go. So you can see my hand becoming a ghost there. And that's because what the app is doing is it's showing you the slide that you've just taken and then overlaying that with what the camera's seeing now. So if that piece of, if my cat, which happens often, had come on the table and knocked that out of the way, then I'd be like, oh, my animation's ruined, damn you, cat. But if you've got onion skin on, it's okay, because you can see on there, you can see on your screen where that bar was. So whatever it is that you're working with, whatever character or prop you're using, if it gets knocked, or if your entire tripod gets knocked, which does often happen as well, if your whole tripod gets knocked, so if I show you now, you can see there that that image is still there for me to line it back up. So all you need to do in that instance is just line it back up, and then you're back on track. And then you can go back to your movement. And you can see as well with onion skin how far you've moved something. So I know you probably can't see that clearly on here, but on the phone or the tablet screen that you're using, it'll be obvious how far you've moved it, and you can keep track of where you're going. So those are the basics of animating. Now, obviously, like I said, I'm just going to switch cameras now to sign off. So yeah, so those are some of the basics. Like I said, I've not gone into loads of detail in terms of using the app, and there's loads of other videos out there, loads of amazing tutorials that will show you how to do stop motion animation. There'll be loads of other tips that I've not thought of, lots of things about how to set up your working area and making it, you know, work really well with your light. So do go and find more stuff if you feel like you need a little bit more support with the animation. But what I mainly wanted to talk to you about today was these different methods that work really well with poetry, I think, because there's loads of flexibility. You can create loads of different scenes. If you wanted to do, you know, with the drawing one, you could use different media. So if you're into like charcoals or oil pastels, you could create some really beautiful images to go with your poem. Even painting, you know, you can go crazy and do a big abstract painting to go with your poem. So I hope that's given you some ideas. I realised that I was going to pause for questions. I promised Jess that I would, and I haven't, because I'm not very good at pausing. So just to check, I don't think we've got any comments come through. So no, I'm just going to wait and hear from Jess. No. So I think we're good on the comments front. If you do have any questions afterwards, and it will go up onto YouTube afterwards, so you can view this after we've finished the live stream. So yeah, I hope you have a good time animating your poems. Like I said, if you haven't written your poem yet, then you can go back and watch last week's workshop and get some tips off Andy. So we'd love to see what you're making as well. So if you're kind of working along with us on these workshops, please do send in what you're doing. Next week's going to be all about editing. So it's going to be taking the poem that you've written, and the visuals that you've made and putting them all together. So we'll be looking at different apps and software that you can use to do that, different techniques you can use to record your voiceover, and then you can put it all together to make a really nice film. Once you've done all of that, once you've created your masterpieces, please do send them in to us. So we're going to have, we're going to make sure that there's info on the website so that you can send in your videos to us. And if you do that, what we'll then do is we'll put them together as like a show reel. So we'll have all the different sort of animated poems that people have made in response to this, and we'll put that up on our YouTube. So please do send them to us because we'd love to see what you've been doing. So thanks for watching, and hopefully we'll see you back next week for some editing tips, and have fun animating.